So today we're going to be talking to perspective philosophy about veganism because recently I talked on stream about fishing and I came to the conclusion that I think fishing is actually immoral. And I wanted to talk more about veganism with the lad. I don't know where he is. Oh, here he is. We can actually start right away. Dope. Dope, 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 dope. Whew. Just waiting for them to enter now. Waiting to call. Ready to call. I'll just call him right now. There you go. Ah, there you go. Anyway, so yeah, we're going to be talking about veganism because I'm having this moral crisis about one of my favorite hobbies, which is fishing. Okay? And I miss it, but I think it might be actually terribly immoral. And I might have basically zero moral justification for the act. And if I have zero moral justification for the act, then I obviously can't do it, right? Then I have no reason whatsoever to do it. So that's why I wanted to talk up to the guy about it. A human fishing as an individual is natural. Just because something is quote unquote natural doesn't mean it's good. Like if I'm hungry, is it natural for me to bash somebody's head in and like take their food? Survival of the fittest. Why is fishing immoral? Okay, so the thing is, I fish for sport. And if I don't need to fish for, okay, right? So I like to fish because I enjoy fishing, right? I enjoy the act of fishing. I do catch and release. And so if I catch a fish, right? I just released a video on it, actually on my YouTube channel. So if you guys want to check it out, I talk about it at length on my YouTube video. It's about like, it's like only a 10-minute video. It's not super long. I talk about how I grew up fishing and I enjoyed it very much. It was like a bonding activity for me and my grandfather, me and my father, when I did get to spend time with them. And the appeal of fishing is lodging a metal hook into an animal and slowly reeling it in. And the most entertaining part of the whole sport is them fighting you because they've got a chunk of metal lodged in their body as they're struggling away to get out. If we would have just changed the dynamic a little bit.
Hello.
Oh, hey, how's it going? Can you hear me?
Hi, I'm currently live. I don't know if you are.
Oh, I'm live. Yeah, don't worry about it.
Oh, right. Yeah. Nice to be on, man. Really appreciate it.
No problem. No problem. When did you first hear about me? I always find that an interesting start.
Yeah. So a few months back, one of my viewers said, "See if you can get on the Hippy Dippy podcast." And then since that, I've watched Destiny on your podcast a few times, like some of the roundtables. And then I reviewed for me patrons the Vosh Bastiat debate, which was something. So
did you like that? We had an article recently published about it. Apparently,
oh, really?
Yeah,
about coercion, perhaps.
About coercion. Let me see if I can find it quick and read you the title of the article because I found it extremely interesting. Where is it here?
Apparently, me chat could not hear you. Sorry, there, guys. You should be able to hear him now. I just realized that that was turned off.
Let's see. Where is it? It was something like Dick, like the perplexing moral quandary of Dick Island or something. It was a very interesting article.
The whole debate was just about fellatio, man. It was the economics, the ethical economics of fellatio. Like brilliant.
You know, there's less interesting things to debate about, you know?
That's true. It was great. I actually really enjoyed it. I think like I've called Bastiat out on via email, like because I think his understanding of coercion was just, I don't know, not for me. Definitely not for me.
Not for you?
But no.
So you're an anti-pay for fellatio, man?
Well, I'm please, if I'm on a desert island, don't make me suck dick to survive, kind of man. I don't know.
Okay.
But actually, leading on to that, I am a socialist, and I think you are sort of left-leaning. Is that right?
Yeah, people. I guess the term that flies around most is social democrat. I guess that's the most known way to describe it.
Okay, so I'm assuming you agree with the notion of equality for humans.
Of course, yeah.
Okay, that's good. That's great. Like, so, to go down the.
Well, first, can I tell you why I wanted to talk about this specifically
Oh
first?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. Sorry, I'm jumping the gun.
So I growing up, I fished with my grandfather and my father a lot. It was one of the few activities that I did to bond with them, right? And it was something I did all throughout my childhood. I would go to the beach, I'd fish. I'd go to the lake, I'd fish. Go to the river, I'd fish. And it was something I really enjoyed because it was a bonding activity, right? So I would say it was a big part of my culture growing up. Just being able to fish, it was like a really big staple as I was growing up. And recently, I stumbled upon this weird kind of recreation of the old anti-SJW videos. You know the videos I'm talking about, like the pink-haired girl, crazy leftist SJW type commentary videos. You familiar with
Yeah,
what I'm
like
talking about?
the Trigglypuff ones, or the what
Yes.
is it, Big Red kind of stuff. Yeah, that
Yes.
kind of shit.
And it was
Yeah,
like
sorry,
this,
I
but
mean,
it's a subsect of it. And it's this thing online, and I'm sure I can find it if I look for it quickly on YouTube, is like Fisher versus crazy activists, right? Where there's just like a kid fishing with his dad, and like some person comes up and it's like, you are a terrorist and the worst person, ISIS, stop fishing. And I looked at these videos, and as somebody who like fished a ton growing up, I found it quite like, it angered me very quickly. Like, these are just people just trying to spend their Sunday afternoon doing an activity that they like and enjoy, and there's these activists like bothering them, or a lot of times it would be people who own the property, and there would be like some old woman who owns the property coming out like, you kids can't fish here, and then that's a whole other issue. But that also would piss me off, like the idea that somebody owning a lake kind of like got to me a little bit. and
yeah, I got that.
and so I it really angered me. And there was this one activist that said, if you're collapsing their lungs when you bring them out of the water. I'm like, that's not true. And well, it wasn't true. You don't kill a fish just by bringing them out of the water. But then I did research, and it was like, well, actually, catch and release if you has a certain success rate for survival for the fish. It actually has a very alarming high death rate when you release them, and
Mhm.
the type of barbed hooks and the type of damage they can do. And I was doing research, and eventually, I heard like some of these activists in one of these videos say like, you're making that fish feel pain and suffer. And in my head, I never thought about like, does the fish feel pain? And I'm like, there's no way. They're fish. I've never, like, the fish never. And in my head, it was like, the fish never looked at me and said, bro, that hurts, you know?
Yeah,
So I did research expecting to find out like, well, of course they feel pain, but they don't suffer. You know what I mean? Like, kind of like an instinctual pull away type of feeling.
yeah, yeah,
But the more research I did, it seems like the consensus is pretty out there that no, the fish do feel pain. No, they do
yeah,
suffer. And just because they don't screech and holler like a cat doesn't mean they don't feel that. And so now I'm in this position where I need to completely reevaluate this thing that I've been doing since I was a child, and is probably one of my favorite outdoor hobbies that I still do. And it's put me in a weird position where I'm balancing the moral quandaries of catch and release fishing, of fishing for food, fishing invasive species. I would say that would be the one thing that I think is the most morally sound, is if you fish specifically to catch invasive species to help local environment and ecosystems. Because you know how a lot of fish, if you catch them, you actually can't release them if they're an invasive species. You have to keep them and kill them to
right.
help maintain the ecosystem. So I've been going through this moral quandary of whether it is moral for me to fish and with my catch and release, and if that isn't moral, whether it would be moral for me to fish and then eat them. And if those two things aren't moral, what if I just fish specifically to target invasive species? And so this is how I started fading over to the topic of veganism, because the idea of participating in a sport, which can be defined as you put a chunk of metal into an animal, and the most fun part of the sport is seeing how they struggle and fight as you reel them in.
Yeah,
Fight against
resist.
that. Like, if I did that to a
Yeah,
cat and we heard the cat scream and run around, everybody would immediately see what's wrong with it. But because it's a fish and it's very expressionless, it doesn't make noise. I guess it's harder to emphasize.
yeah. I mean, I think that like the strange thing is, like, you're absolutely right. Fish do feel pain, and not only that, like some evidence, like we have quite a lot of evidence to even show that fish can have emotional distress. I think that we argue that the most emotionally sensitive creature is the elephant-nosed fish. So you even have that aspect of things where like they can even have like like even psychological issues.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're absolutely right. Like when you say that, like they don't have their lungs like explode and stuff when they're pulled out from the water. But that's like with you fishing. When people buy fish, a lot of the fish comes from incredibly deep. And in terms of like if you think of it like deep sea
Yeah,
diving,
deep sea fishing. Like if you
yeah,
pull a blobfish out of the water, that can kill it due to it's just not an environment it's used to.
yeah, it needs like a certain pressure to survive. I think I don't know if its lungs explode or anything, but it can definitely kill them, and pretty horribly as well. Like and like I think that you're right. I think people look at fish, and I think the biggest things is that they look different, they act different.
They look silly,
Um,
right?
what? Sorry.
They just look silly. They just don't look at like
That's
anything
it.
we can relate to.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like, would we think the same with like, people who don't look the same? And I think this
Yeah.
is kind of the issue. Like we've always done this throughout human history. We've looked at like quote unquote the other, and we've looked for a similarity between us and them, which seems to justify either treating them or mistreating them. Like treating them well or mistreating them. And sometimes it's been skin color, sometimes it's been things like intelligence, gender. And I think that we've found that, in recent years that none of these hit the mark. Like each one of these proposed characteristics which differentiates moral treatment seems to be inadequate. And I guess the question I want to pose to you in this is what characteristic do you think is the prerequisite for ethical consideration?
Ethical consent. See, this is the thing I haven't thought a lot of. My basically my way of thinking of it was, oh damn, that makes another living thing hurt. Well, I don't like that. I kind of don't want to do it anymore. That's as far as it like went for me, really. I
Hmm.
guess I'm a pansy, you could say. But I guess for me, when it comes to moral consideration, I guess it comes to the idea of consciousness and the ability to like feel. Sorry if there's some like music background, and ability to feel pain.
Yeah, well, that I think is solid. To be entirely honest with you, I think I would argue. I'm a continental philosopher, so I use terms like the will, but really like subjective experience. If you have and sentience is the foundation. So, conscious, evaluation of a pain pleasure response. That I would say was the foundation of consideration. So, if we think that it is like something like consciousness, like conscious awareness of pain and suffering, like, do you really think that we would be justified in, let's say, performing this act on, let's say, like another like creature, let's say, like, as say, a cat or a dog? But then why not even go further? You see, like a human. Like, do you think that there's a reason that we can, you know, treat one as food
I
and
think I
not a
think
resource?
I think that the thing that distincts it, or for at least most people, is that we are humans and we don't do that to our own. Where they are like animals, and they get different moral consideration because they don't think the same way as we do. They don't have the same like ability to think like we do. That's I guess how most people think of it, right?
I mean, people have made that exact argument though for like notions of nationalism and racism.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not a race realist, by the way. I'm just going to posit that right now. I don't think that there is any biological capacity that's in, let's say, like white people. That's not in any other race. I think that's stupid. But these are the kind of arguments that have been perpetuated in the past. But it's like even if we were to grant the racist, or let's say
Can you
the
give me one
atheist.
moment? Can I give me
Yeah.
one moment? I'm looking at this thing on stream about these like I'm just background video. So this activist picks up the fish and he throws it into the water.
Mhm.
Uh, but I just want to make very clear to stream. That's not how you deposit a fish. He basically just dunked a fish into the water. That fish is most certainly dead now. That's not how you save a fish. If you throw a fish like that off of a bridge and it just slams into the water, that most likely is going to kill the fish due to the impact, due to how sudden the impact is, the immediate change in environment. You got to kind of slowly kind of put the fish. If this activist really wanted to save the fish, he'd have to go off the bridge near the water and slowly kind of let the fish in.
Mm.
Yeah. So this activist, in trying to save a fish, probably just killed the fish. Just wanted to
Oh
make that
yeah,
clear that this is not how
I
you
think
redeposit a fish into a lake. Okay,
that's
so that's not
solid.
how you
Like
do it.
for like a solid good piece of advice. Like if I'm ever saving fish, like I think that honestly, it is weird like how much we don't know about animals. Like I think that like when I was growing up, we used to believe that goldfish died, and they died, they'd float on their bellies, like float on the sides, and a lot of the time that can mean they're constipated, apparently. And so my family must have just murdered so many goldfish by flushing them down the toilet without even realizing that apparently they're not dead at all, and they're actually just constipated. It's like, oh my god. So like the more you know. But yeah, like it's like take for example ableism though. Like why do you think that, if we say that the capacity for intelligence is important, like why do we care about severely disabled people who will never have never have the capacity of intelligence of a fully functional
It'd
adult
be
human?
because they still feel consciousness, they still feel pain, they still have a sort of experience, even if the experience is not to have the same knowledge or see the world in the same way as us. That doesn't necessarily take away their moral consideration. I see the world very differently than say somebody in India does, or somebody with a different spiritual background, or
Yeah.
somebody just in a different geographic region would see the world very differently than me. But that doesn't rob them of moral consideration. So just because somebody sees the world differently from a lower intelligence level or with less knowledge doesn't completely derive and rob them of their experience.
I completely agree. I absolutely completely agree. So why would we say that justifies, like, for example, treating one species as less than another?
So there's something, and again, like I'm already like I'm already like pretty pilled on this, so I just wanted to kind of talk it out on stream. So
Mm-hmm.
this is something I've heard, and I wonder if you have an answer to this. What if
Yeah.
something cannot give you moral consideration, right? If something doesn't give you moral consideration, why is it our responsibility to give it moral consideration, right? If a bear
Mm.
was to see me, it doesn't care really if I live or die, but I then care if it should live or die.
Yeah, well, I would say that, like, in terms of like having the capacity for like agency, like rational agency, like obviously bears, lions, other predatory animals don't have it. And when we are evaluating, it's like when we talk about what is right and just in that scenario, is it determined by what the animal thinks, or is it determined by what we come to know, what we can understand about it? If it's about what is actually right, then regardless of that animal's intelligence and the conclusions it might draw, if it can draw any conclusions about this in anyways, it's irrelevant to the question. It's like if a
Yeah,
child.
and this would also, yeah, I was about to say, like, we could say a baby that was just born, if it can't give me moral consideration, then do I give it more consideration? But then again, I could say, like, the difference there would be that it has the possibility of giving more consideration later in life, whereas in a fish does not. But
You
then
could
let's
always say
say
this about.
the child was disabled and could never have
Yeah,
or give me the
exactly.
same
There
sort of
you
moral
beat us to the
consideration
punch.
as
You beat us to the
understand.
punch.
Yeah, but
And
let me also be clear. Like, I'm not extremely educated on disability. Is there a certain disability or anything that could happen to a human mentally that could actually make them not give humans moral consideration?
well, I think that I would say that, like, in terms of like disability, there are, like, I don't know how many disabilities would affect it. Like, for example, like rationality, to the point in which they would lose that agency to the nth degree. But I would certainly say that things could, like, certain disabilities can inhibit like maturity, to the point in which they're kept in like a child, like almost a childlike state. You'd say like, oh, they've got the mind of like a 5-year-old or something like that. Like in terms of their ability to conceptualize and draw conclusions. So I wouldn't be surprised in terms of like not being able to give people at least adequate consideration. They might be limited to the what's called autonomous morality, like being told what's right and wrong by like an adult. It's kind of like when we tell kids, like, don't punch your sister. It's like what we're really saying is, like, if you punch your sister, you're going to get wrong. And they might understand that it's absolutely wrong, and they might understand the foundations of that, but they know that they don't want to get wrong. So and like the punishment, so it's like kind of, I think there could probably be, depending on the disability, be stuck like that. And then obviously there's even considerations of international considerations of morality. Like, should you consider someone who wouldn't consider you ethically? So someone who's indoctrinated, who thinks all outsiders are their enemies. They're from a xenophobic tribe, for example. I know that Vegan Gains always brings up a tribe which lives in
Yeah, and then I know that it basically led to like I know Destiny and Vegan Games had a discussion about veganism, and originally it led to Destiny basically biting the bullet and saying like, yeah, we'll screw them then, right? But then they had
Yeah.
a second discussion where then he was like, well, what if they don't adopt veganism and they just never can? You can never make them, and then like Vegan Games bit the bullet in the other direction, and so a lot of
Yeah.
fire and a lot of directions over there.
Honestly, I think that Vegan Gains really needs to read some ethics. Like, bless him, I like the guy. I've talked to Richard a few times, but his understanding of morality is like the reason that I think Destiny memes him so hard in the first place is because he's a vegan who says he's a subjectivist. So it's like, well, none of this matters. Why are you trying to, why are you trying to, prescribe to me an ethic which is definitionally, supposed to be subject to your attitudes. Like, you're trying to change my attitude in life, and it just seems a bit backward. But I think that obviously I'm a moral realist, and from what you've described, it's like at least a form of moral realism. Like, what matters is the experience of individuals. Not just the what we like or dislike, but the actual lived experience of those individuals. And if that's what we're considering, then regardless of another's ability to understand the scenario, the moral fact of the matter exists in that experience, and in the animal's pain, in the human's pain, in that scenario. There is actually a right and a wrong thing to do in that situation.
So would you say that since it has to do with experience and all of this, now let's go back to my fishing thing. So you would say that fishing is an immoral act then, right? Fishing for catch and release.
Yeah, I used to fish. I wasn't very good at it, and yeah, it's immoral. It's wrong.
What exactly would you say it is immoral for?
I think that it causes unnecessary suffering to a sentient being who not only faces a considerable amount of distress and harm, from the obviously have the risk of death, also other complications. I think even infections and stuff like that. Like, I think apparently from I remember reading something. I don't know if it's true, but even like when people pick them up and accidentally harm them, like their gills and stuff like that. But there's quite a few complications that can happen to the fish.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's the pain of it.
There's ways to reduce it. Like, for instance, you're supposed to fish in the winter, not the summer, actually, because it gives the fish a better chance of survival. You do not use barbed hooks. Barbed hooks, while it gives you a better chance of hooking the fish, it can do more damage to it. You're supposed to use unbarbed hooks. There's a bunch of things you can do. You do not throw the fish back into the water. You kind of slowly, like put it back into the water, and let it give it time to adjust before going back in. If you hook it on the body, it has a much less likelihood of surviving due to the possible damaging of internal organs. There's like a lot of things you can do to make sure that the fish has a higher rate of survival, right? And there's things you can do to probably reduce the amount of pain that is being caused. And this is the point that keeps getting brought up to me by people on Twitter once I put this out. Which I guess this is probably my most soy boy, cuck boy take, is the idea of like me possibly giving up like this thing that I've done forever because of the weird like fish that nobody cares about. But to me, like all that does is just reduce the amount of harm being done. When you could just stop the harm altogether by not fishing for sport, right?
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much beat us to it. Like, I think you've gave it some thought, man. Like, you can genuinely just avoid and the risk, obviously, of causing further harm in the sense of, like, you can't guarantee it's not going to hook them on the body. You can't guarantee that it's, like they're not going to die when you put them back in.
I mean, there's certain things you can do to give them like an 80 to 90% survival rate, but I mean, who would want to? I wouldn't want to even take those chances if somebody put my life on the line, right?
It's kind of like, would it be justified in like, all right, so I like shooting people, but right, can I shoot people with rubber bullets now? It's like, no, you can't. No, you can't. And it's the same thing with. I think you in your video you even made the argument like.
Oh, you watched the video?
Oh yeah, I watched your video. Yeah, I watched it.
What you think about?
As soon as I saw it, I was like, oh wow, this is unbelievably coincidental. Like, and that was a really good video. I think that you're still wrong about the invasive species thing. And you would be wrong to eat them as well. And we can talk about that. And I think obviously there's the overall, diet and lifestyle of veganism, which we can kind of go on to if after that, if you're interested.
Sure, I can do that. But the next thing would be, of course, and I just want to build up because I don't want to skip anything.
Yeah, yeah, cool.
So we've already both agreed that probably hunting just for sport is most likely wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
Of course, I've thought about this for like 2 weeks now, so I haven't put like studies or papers into it. And again, this is something it's taken me time to adjust to because this is something that like it's something I've been doing for years. I've been doing for almost for 20 years now, right? So it takes
Mhm.
time for me to get used to that. But let's
Oh,
say,
cool.
what if I'm a hungry man, right? I'm a guy, and let's say I just lost my job due to COVID, and I need to
Right.
find a new way to feed my family. And I'm near a lake, and it's public prop. Well, it doesn't really matter if it's public or private for moral reasons, but it's a lake, and I can go there and I can fish and I can provide for my family, right? And it's between me and the fish. What about then, right?
Well, I mean, if it's a survival situation, fair enough. But then I mean, depends. I know that like the United States, especially, bankruptcy and issues in terms of survival
Yeah.
can be pretty bleak.
I mean,
Um,
for just an example, I currently am between homes, right? I just lost my home. I've been homeless and couch surfing for like 2 weeks now, right? I just finally got a new place approved, but let's say I didn't, and let's say that I wasn't and due to this I wasn't able to move my streaming equipment. I couldn't have a job, and I'm in a position where one of the very few skills I know I have is fishing, right? It's one of the ways I know I could know how to feed myself.
Yeah. Well, I guess this is it. Like, I mean, like the first thing I'd say is, you should probably exhaust all other ways of feeding yourself. So, like food banks are in the UK. I don't know what it would be in the US. You probably have like some sort of, I think food stamps, I think you get. And, um, like, do you have somewhere where you can go and where like the government or like charities will provide food?
Well, I'm sure if there's the idea of there being another way to do it, right? Like,
Mhm.
so I'm trying to isolate like first
Oh, you mean
before
if it
like
was a
build up.
must?
Like it's like I gotta choose between my family starving to death or me eating Nemo over here, right? So there's
Yeah.
my options. So would it be an immoral choice or I would definitely assume it would be a selfish choice, but for me choosing my family over the fish.
I don't think that it would be necessarily wrong. I think you'd be more justified in stealing from a supermarket or something. But if it was like purely survival and
Yeah,
you had
I'm
no other
trying to
alternative,
isolate
yeah, I know. I'm just like that way, like it was like, and like this is what we always get. Like you're stranded on a desert island, and
hmm
and for whatever reason, vegans live like exclusively on desert islands. So if you're ever
Yep.
looking for some beachfront property, you just have to convert. But the thing is that stranded on a desert island, you got to feed yourself. How are you going to do it? You can fish. Is it justified? And even Peter Singer is like, yeah. And I even said to Peter Singer because he's like hardcore utilitarian, right? I'm a deontologist, so I think you have an obligation to yourself before the fish. So I'd say like, look, even in this scenario, you're
hmm
doing the right thing, killing the fish.
Would
Like
you
even
would
if
apply
like,
the same standard to humans though? Like for
yeah, I
example,
would, yeah,
if I
yeah,
was to go and murder somebody and take their food, that would be
100%.
a moral thing under the system too. So we're
Yes.
giving this fish and a human the same amount of moral consideration.
Yes, but I would say that we'll have a greater obligation to, let's say, our friends and family and those around us and other humans before
So because
animals.
our experience is what matters, I would assume, or something along that
It
line.
it is it is, but in terms of it's like what W.D. Ross says in The Right and the Good.
Mm.
If we're trying to maximize the experience of everyone anyway, we're going to create this is what's called like threshold deontology. We're going to create a rule based structure in order to maximize that outcome anyway. So you end up with like he gives the example of do I save if I've got the option to save my mother or somebody else's mother, and he basically says like you are obligated to your mother more because if everyone saves their mother on if we universalize it we'll get a system which actually creates a better outcome, which is why ethics typically are universalized.
Okay. So
um,
here's a question though. What about equality of someone's experience in life, right?
mhm.
So let's say that I would say due to the intelligence and length of a human's life and all these other factors that go in, I would personally say that a human's life seems to have been a higher quality, the experiences they experience, a higher quality than that of a flounder that might live for how many years, right? That most certainly not as long as a human, though. So, with that in consideration, would that at all come into play when making a determination over, hey, if I'm in this situation, I should go for the fish instead of the human due to the amount of life is left in this fish, due to the fact that their experience is not of the same quality of this other human being, etc., etc.
I would say not, and I'll make an argument for that in a second. I mean, like one, I wouldn't say like intelligence is like bringing a higher quality of life anyway, because if you look, the correlation between intelligence and depression is usually quite a solid one. So usually the smartest people are pretty unhappy anyway. So as you creep up, would actually be better off living in
Okay.
blissful ignorance. But I mean,
But length of
like
time could be definitely something that you could calculate in
yeah, but
there,
then
right?
tortoises will be more important than humans, right? Like
Well, okay, but if you wanted to make that, for example, like if we have a child and an elderly person, most people would say the elderly person is, and you have to choose between the two. You choose the child over the elderly person because the elderly person lived their life, quote unquote, right? You know, they've
yeah,
gone through their thing. But wouldn't the same thing apply to a fish who lives for 2 years and you know it's been alive for 6 months versus like a person who's like 30, who's probably had 30 to 40 years left?
yeah, I probably agree. I mean, I think that I would say like when it comes down to it, we judge narratives. And this is actually, if anyone wants to know, like narrative theory of ethics. So we judge a life narrative as a whole, which is why, like, when we talk about euthanasia, we would say a person's life was better if they had died sooner and didn't, like, live through that suffering. So, like, I would say that we judge life narratives in that respect. So I have no problem with that. I'd say that when we talk about the experience of the fish, though, like the consideration of the fish in and of itself, we talk about its life narrative as being equal to another individual's life narrative. And I'd say that we're not judging necessarily, and I think this is Tom Regan who says this, we don't judge the contents of the cup, we judge the cup. And the reason that we do that is primarily because we can't access the mental states of
Because
another
we can never
individual.
be sure. Because for all
Yeah,
we know, this person could be like an extremely depressed individual who's constantly going through pain. And this fish could be the best fish on the block. It could be eating worms every day. It could be chilling. You know, has like a fishy wife or something, right?
yeah,
We have
yeah.
no clue. But we could make educated guesses, though, right? We could make an
uh,
educated guess.
yeah, based on that, like nature and stuff, and like the perceived
Yeah.
resistance to suffering and stuff like that. Which is, I think, what we need to do.
Yeah, we'd have to go
Um,
off maybe this, like if like, because if somebody puts this decision in front of me, I have to make a choice. I'd probably end up choosing the human because statistically, I think somebody who's 30 years old, probably has 30 years of life left, and those 30 years of life make up a lot more time for pleasure, possibly over pain, over than the fish who has like a year left. Um, I mean, I would basically have to go for statistical averages of quality of life in said country. You have to like, but I think in most scenarios, it probably the human would come out on top for the amount of net benefit of net experience over time, right?
I don't know, man. You could have whales in there. You could have tortoise in there. And then obviously, if you're going down the hedonic calculus route, which is what I would not recommend, is you've got intensity of pleasure, duration of pleasure. So I mean, hell, a pig can orgasm for like something like hours, and so you know what I mean, like
You don't know
like
my private life.
yeah, so like it like in terms of even natural capacity for pain and pleasure, it's not really as clean cut. I think that the main argument with intelligence and the quality that is being brought around about intelligence is what's like in what's called in Heideggerian terms the separation of ready to hand and present at hand. So a ready to hand state is being in a situation in which you are, living in the moment, if you will. If you're riding your bike and then you start thinking about how to pedal, you're probably going to ride your bike really badly. But if you ride your bike and you're just in the moment and you get in the flow of things, you're in a ready to hand state. You're using something as a tool and you just, you're in a very first person, imminent, immediate feeling of the world. In a present at hand state, you're evaluative about that experience. So you're thinking about your experience. So, like, if you start thinking about, riding a bike or, how bikes work and you start evaluating life, the examined life, that's typically like the big difference, right? And I
Hmm.
think animals are typically in a ready to hand state, whilst humans would be capable of a present at hand state. And there's
Can you explain the
advantages and
difference one more time?
disadvantages of this. So I'd say like an animal would be in a state of being in the moment, like a moment by moment basis, like experiencing the here and now. Whilst a human can live in both. They can be in the here and now and in a disassociation with the here and now, evaluating it, modifying its experience of reality by thinking about reality and hovering over it, if you will, in a form of
thinking about his
objectivity.
past and future and like stuff like that.
Yeah, which is actually one of the things that's arguably formed by language, which is the construction of the I. Being able to have a self-identity allows you to have what's called, like, arguably dyadic memory, being able to associate yourself in the past, present, and future. But I think this comes with advantages and disadvantages. One, fish don't feel existential crisis. So if we're talking about someone in the United States or the UK, there's maybe quite a high chance of things like depression, and other psychological issues. Fish don't have those. So when we talk about the lived experience of a fish, it depends on its moment by moment basis, its material needs being met, and so on.
Give me a second. Again, this guy didn't know what he was doing. You can't just backhand with the mouth throw the fish in the water and think you're helping it. Okay, this guy almost did a trick shot with this fish. Okay, you're not shooting basketball hoops. You're returning a fish to the ocean. Okay, I'm sorry. Continue.
Yeah, no problem, man. Yeah, so like in terms of the actual lived experience of a human versus an animal, like just the psychological complexity alone doesn't necessitate that it's a better experience. For example, or like it would be a worse experience even to get
if I was super dumb and could only live in the moment, right? But that could be like I could end up living like a really good experience there, right? So I guess for me, it's just like the idea of like statistically, humans would have a longer period of time to like have experiences, right?
But it's like the quality, as you say, of those experiences. Like,
so if somebody had a net mostly negative life over a net mostly positive life, but that tiny fish for 1 year had a mostly positive life, then that fish's life would be more important.
Well, I wouldn't say so, because I'm a deontologist, so I'm not basing this basically off simply the experiences, positive and negative, of the animal. But I would say that my responsibility to, let's say, my family, regardless, let's say all of my family are living really bad lives, and primarily for, let's say, it's because they are struggling for food and so on. But then I can feed my family. That will increase the quality of their lives, but maybe not as much as the animals from which I would feed them. It's like I wouldn't say that you are wrong to feed your family.
Okay, so I there's still a few stuff that I am a little hooked up on, but I'll just keep moving because there's other stuff I want to cover. Right, we're still on fishing. Yeah, cool. So, what about this idea that this thing I proposed that might be able to be a moral way of fishing? Right? This idea of what if we are specifically fishing for invasive species to help the local ecosystem, which therefore would help balance it more, protect more species down the road, protect the ecosystem, and make everybody's life quality of life higher, and also protect the environment. That could be something that could be a moral form of fishing. In fact, we've already kind of considered this with laws and regulations in fishing, saying that if you catch an invasive species, you have to kill it. You cannot release it back into the wild.
Yeah, I see the argument there. It's kind of like the sustainable hunters are the most the best thing for sustainability. A lot of things like deer populations get too high, so they've got to go in and cull them in order to prevent deers from actually starving to death because they've consumed all their resources. I think there's a few arguments against that. I think the first thing I would say is that, look, I think that it depends on what we mean by invasive species in the first place. I think invasive species, for example, the grey squirrel in the UK is an invasive species and gets shot. Really, it's only shot because it's grey, and our squirrels are red, and the grey squirrel is
so it'd have to be a damaging invasive species, right? Not just invasive.
Exactly. There's
that's what I implied. That's what I meant. I didn't mean like, well, this bird has the wrong feather color, therefore it must be exterminated, right? That's not what I meant.
Unfortunately, people do approach it like that, though, because they think of like a nativistic kind of like, this is the natural habitat of a grey squirrel, or red squirrel rather, and so we don't want grey squirrels coming over and out competing red squirrels because they'll go extinct. And it's like, well, I'm sorry, but the grey squirrels are better. I don't get it. And so like the
Squirrel
aesthetics,
fascism.
and this is a big thing. Aesthetics are like when people talk about conservation, it's usually about aesthetics. People talk about saving snow leopards and polar bears, but no one ever talks about like like the ugly kind of species that are dying off, and like whether they need to be
Nobody
saved,
gives a
even if
fuck
they
about the
are.
catfish, right?
This is the thing, yeah. So like in terms of that thing, that's something that needs to be considered. But then if let's say we say that it's something that's actually causing ecological damage, as in it will lead to the destruction and greater harm of the wildlife around it, I think that we definitely should intervene. How we intervene is what needs to be brought into question, and whether we should take lethal means first of all. So one of the big things in in hunting is the kill the animal in order to prevent it from reproducing, having more deer, something like that. But then you can also have what's called catch and release systems, which are more difficult. Don't get me wrong, but then you can catch them, neuter them, send them back, make sure they're okay, send them
Well,
back.
this would
Um,
also. I mean, I would assume this could also be possible in fishing, where I mean, hypothetically, even though I don't think there's really a mechanism for us to do this on a large scale. I haven't done the research, but I doubt it. I could catch a fish, neuter it, and then release it back into the wild under the idea of like we're reducing the population while not
yeah, that'd
exterminating
be
this
sound.
thing's
That'd be
experiences.
sound.
But also, let's also realize that like
The
most
chances of that.
most people don't have the tools. We don't have the resources to do that. Therefore, the best means at our disposal right now is just catch and kill for invasive species, damaging invasive species, right?
Yeah, but I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, I think that it's usually a very easy way out for the government as well to just allow privateers to go and do their hobby and then also, perform an action. It's like hunting licenses. It's like they generate revenue, um, and there's no reason for the government to intervene because there's no like they're relying upon hunters to basically fulfill a role which they may be able to do better, in terms of catch and release systems and stuff. Um, the third option, which is becoming more and more relevant as time goes on, is actually genetic modification, gene drives. So I don't know if you've seen recently, we've been genetically modifying things like mosquitoes to breed with each other and produce
Okay,
to breed with each.
one
Sorry.
moment. KJ in chat. Uh, I guess it's fine to kill people who can't experience orgasm. That's not what we're saying. And if you think that's the only way you get joy out of life, I'm very sad for you, and you need to close your laptop. Okay, continue.
That does sound like the internet though. I mean, you get these like so for example gene drive or like genetically manipulating animals so that the genes that they pass on produce an offspring which is like infertile or has certain characteristics, for example. I'd say that that would be ultimately the ethical aim that we should be going towards. If
Mm-hmm.
the only thing that we could do was hunt in order to prevent greater harm, I think that it should be done, but it should be done right, and it should be done. I don't think that it should be done commercially. I don't think that it should be done by private. And you could volunteer, for example.
You don't think I should be able to go into like a lake, cast out my line, catch this invasive species, and kill them for conservation efforts?
Yeah, pretty much. Because I think that like, there's an issue with regulation. It's like who's doing it for conservation and who's doing it for a laugh.
Mm-hmm.
That would probably be me main concern.
Well,
Um,
does it matter whether or not somebody's doing it for conservation or for a laugh? For under the idea that it has the same effect. If it has the same effect, would it matter necessarily?
Yeah, probably because of how they would approach the task. So, for example, if you approach it in the sense that it's a reluctant duty and you perform it, and ultimately you do it so that you hit the moral standard, then fair enough. But I think if you're doing it to have a good time, there's the risk of like depending on the person there's the risk of not considering like so for example not doing the minimum. So you'd have to like ban barbed hooks, and have like and then you're gonna have to have like police actually come out and make sure that everyone is using the right equipment, that they're not performing the action in a way that would cause other more and more harm, and also that they're not even causing greater environmental damage because like
Well, Well,
Like
okay,
hunters, for example, sometimes
okay.
kill
Well, let me
predators.
put it like this. Like, so I've enjoyed fishing my whole life, right? If I went, let's say we started to implement these programs, and I'm like, look, I would do this because I have fine enjoyment out of it, but I'm also doing something that's good for the community.
Yeah, I don't have
There
a
would be
problem with that.
nothing wrong with that, right? Um,
Yeah, I wouldn't say there'd be anything wrong with that. No.
yeah. So, but here's something chat's bringing up, and I think I am considering too. What about the practicality of this? The idea that
Oh yeah, yeah.
we
It's
also know that there's not going to be a large scale government spade and neuter program for the preservation of fish life anytime soon. Definitely invasive species of fish that damage the community. That's not going to be really a thing that's on the top priority of any government at the moment. There's a million other issues that people like are facing, and I think just due to how humans
and they
are
don't fix those
and the
either.
selfish nature of human beings, I think they're gonna be. God, I didn't return the fish. Nobody's know how to put a fish back in water. Anyway, um, because of the fact that people are too busy right now dealing with the issues that humans face, and humans are selfish like that. Wouldn't it make sense for me to say, well, you know what? This is the best way anybody's doing it right now, so I'm gonna go out and fish for invasive species.
I think that is probably like a decent argument. To be fair, I think that
Like
you'd have to
if I
know,
had a
like,
better mechanism, then I would go through that. But this is the only way we have to
yeah.
deal with it right now.
But I think that's it. You'd have to say like, or it implies can. So what can you do in order to aid the situation? And I think that like you would right like so for example, it's like you'd have to know that fishing in that area would actually bring around a greater overall, excuse me, greater overall benefit to those animals, that you're actually respecting the fish and that you're doing it for the fish. So like I would say like keeping up to date on like actual studies.
Does intent really matter to you if it has the same effect? Like we can say that
I
people
think I think
approach things
it's not the
differently,
intent
but like
as much as
does
the
intent.
reasons.
So like let's say there's me and another person, right? Because you keep saying
Mm.
like they have to come in for this reason, this reason. Where my main concern would be the effects the person's having. So let's say that there's me who cares about conservation, and this next guy who just really likes fishing, is just super into fishing, right? And we both cast our lines, we practice it the same way, we do it the same way, we check each other out to make sure we're doing it right. Would there really be a reason for him to go home and me to stay there?
No. I guess
Okay.
the caveat there is the fact that you said we're going to check to make sure we're both doing it right. And that's it. Like it's the concept of right, which implies right reason. It's not like, so for example, knowing that it's only acceptable under X circumstance is basically abiding by the reasons which are institutional, like the law. And I would say that would be under like right reason. So saying like this is why I'm a deontologist is because I think that it's reason that like fundamentally determines the understanding of the consequences in the first place, what consequences we should consider, how we are best to consider them. And I think as long as that he's abiding by those regulations which are rationally embedded in an institution, I have no problem with that. He's not about his feeling. But that being said, I would say he's probably less likely to be the one that's as long as he's trying to, I mean, like that being said, he could be like not considering emotionally, like he might be feel like emotionally like harmed by the idea of like fish being hurt, but then he might appreciate it rationally that there is a right and a wrong in this scenario, and the right thing to do would be help the fish, and the wrong thing to do would be harm them. It's whether he goes away and he starts like trying to join fishing groups and ultimately undermine the consideration of those fish and things like that are the reason that I would say right reason is the important aspect of this, as well as obviously the possibility that you just get people out there who don't care about the rules, and now it's almost impossible to police, because there's so many people out doing the same thing. But yeah, I think like, as long as it's regulated and it's done because that it's the only way in which it can, that can be respected, like you're actually respecting the fish by killing them, then I see it as exactly the same thing as like euthanasia. It's like a necessary, it would be like a necessary evil, if you will. It's like you don't necessarily want to kill the person, but you're doing it for that person, you're doing it to respect them. And I think that the same argument then could be applicable to pretty much all forms of life. It's not just fish in this respect. It's like would we be justified in saying like something like a one-child policy? Interject upon the subjectivity of another for their own benefit.
So okay, so what you're saying is that there is a possibility of me fishing for conservation efforts that could be moral under a current under our current government and system due to not having other massive means of like DNA editing or whatever available.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah, that was the one caveat to my whole thing. It's like, what if it's actually reducing harm overall, right? Because then this helps me deal with two things. One, it helps me deal with the fact that as a kid, I love to fish and I would like to continue doing that. But two, I also want to make sure that I'm acting within a moral framework that I agree with. So here's something that 1 second, let me check chat. Chat, by the way, if you have questions, at me with the question and I'll ask them, because I see a lot of you think we're a bunch of soy boys right now. So I'd like to hear your honest criticism and hear it. I'd like to
I'm
hear it out.
100% a soy boy. Like
100% a soy
the
boy.
soyest. The
Self-admitted soy boy.
self-admitted soy boy, man.
Wow.
Like the thing is, soy's like disgustingly good for you anyway. So I can live with it.
Got it. We'll just wait a few seconds and see if there's anything from chat.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I would love to talk about obviously not just like fishing as like sport and so on, but obviously total lifestyle. When we talk about like veganism, really we talk about like the impacts of buying meat, dairy, and eggs, honey, and also leather, silk, other animal products and byproducts.
1 second. I'm just looking at chat right now. Oh, by the way, somebody brought up the fact that gray squirrels are worse for tree conservation because they feed differently from red squirrels and favor different trees. So there might actually be a difference between gray and red squirrels of some sort.
Most of the time, most of the efforts I've seen are really about the aesthetics,
Mm-hmm.
and also I think one of the things that they talk about is like how it affects the trees in relation to how red squirrels feed. But I couldn't go into the deeper impacts of it all. But as well, like there's not too much wildlife in Britain now anyway. But there's a lot of stuff. Like for example, there's even people like in Scotland who are like shooting seals to protect fishing. And stuff like that. So it's one of the things I wanted to point out about invasive species. Sometimes a species counted as invasive, not just because it's ecologically damaging its own habitat, in which case it's out competing other fish and is just the dominant species, but sometimes it's impacting not British, human profit, like fishing rights and fishing sort of waters where they're like, oh right, well it would be better if this fish wasn't there, kind of thing.
Okay. Can I? We have a lot of questions actually, so let me get through these quick.
Cool.
So the first one would be, and I guess this isn't a question, but I think you should be able to respond to it. This guy isn't being realistic. He's talking in an ideal world. Do you see yourself as like being really idealistic here in any manner?
No, because I think that there is pragmatics from which we can engage in. I think that if we don't talk about the end goal, which is the respect of all of these different creatures, then we're gonna if you aim for half measures, you get quarter measures, right? Like, I think understanding that the likelihood of gene drive gene editing being implemented is unlikely at this point in time, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't raise it to the point of political consciousness and have it talked about so that it, we inspire research and actively try to engage towards that goal.
Okay. The next question is, if you know what NTT is,
Name the trait.
Oh, what is that? Can you tell me what that is?
Okay, so name the trait is an argument which is basically when I said to you about disabled people and stuff like that. That's actually called the argument from marginal cases, which basically argues that there would have to be a defined characteristic which can be used to differentiate the moral treatment of one to the other. So why would we treat an animal differently from, let's say, a disabled human if the attribute which justifies difference in treatment is intelligence, right? And that's what marginal cases basically allows us to to argue from. So
Yeah,
I
basically
mean,
it says like you wouldn't treat this human differently if they had a lower intelligence, or if they had like some disability that made it difficult for them to perceive the world the same way we do, but you are willing to do that to animals. Therefore, so what's the difference there? Like that's what they're trying to say. Yeah.
yeah, basically, Name the Trait is one made by Ask Yourself. So Ask Yourself is another YouTuber, and until his most recent version of Name the Trait, we didn't actually agree on the interpretation, whether it would be an applicable argument, like formally. But now it seems sound to me, and ultimately, it just allows you to compare across. It's like basically it's what's in terms of modal logic, possible worlds. It's a modal Name the Trait, modal marginal cases.
Okay,
Um,
one second. This is a question to me. Why are you watching a fishing video while talking to a vegan? It's funny, but a bit disrespectful. I'm not doing it to be funny. It's because we're talking about fishing. And so what footage am I going to play in the background but fishing, right? Like, it's the topic of discussion. It's not like this is the first time anybody's been exposed to what fishing is, okay?
yeah,
Okay.
and you were actively saying that you thought it was wrong for sport, which
Yeah,
is
like,
yeah.
see, what I'm doing is dragging in all the fishing community on Twitch, and they're going to come here, and then they're going to go protest it, and it's going to get banned on Twitch. That's what we're doing. You get fishing banned.
Well,
Yeah,
like the thing
first
is
step.
that can we say that it's not animal cruelty? And I think this is like, for example, the person eating like live animals and stuff.
It's a bait and switch. True. Okay, sorry. Continue. Continue.
Um, like, but yeah, like there's a person eating like live animals and stuff on like I think it was on Twitch and YouTube and stuff. That streamer, like she was eating like octopi, like live and stuff like that. Like absolutely disgusting.
I was
Um,
watching those videos where this woman ate like an octopus while it was still alive, and that stuff really bothered me, like, deeply. And it was before I went on my whole like fishing like moral quandary, but it just something about that like deeply bothered me, because I could tell that the octopus didn't enjoy it. It was having a terrible time because it ripped its body apart.
yeah,
It didn't.
yeah.
Thing is, it's like they specifically chose like the most painful way to consume that animal. It's like they
Yeah,
went on a path of
sadism. I
just
think it
complete
was
harm.
sadism, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
And I think that, like, I think most sane humans think sadists are bad people.
Hmm.
Um, I think,
Ooh. But while you finish this, I have an interesting question, because this is something that's been posed to me a few times.
mhm.
So just finish this line of thought, and I have a really good question for you. I have two good
Oh yeah.
questions.
I was just gonna say, like, but like, in terms of, our responsibility, I think that, just to kind of say, like, obviously, when we pay for people to, let's say fish or something like that, so that we can consume them, that is in and of itself like a moral issue. Like, there's no. Oh,
You okay?
yeah, yeah. Sorry, I think my stream disconnect. I think my dog actually went and knocked. You're gonna get bloody thrown in. Anyway.
Wow.
Um,
Wow. Immediately the morals out the window. I'll talk.
um, I was gonna say, like, it's a social contract, Charlie.
As the social
Anyway,
he didn't consider he didn't morally consider you, so sucks for him.
he's impeded upon me property. I have the right. Like, the thing
Yeah.
is that like, yeah, like, I think when we talk about when we're moral obligations as well, like when we think about, like, when we actually purchase products, we're then demanding that these products be replaced. So we're actually demanding that other. Did he manage to do it again?
Hey, critically
Sorry.
thinking veteran,
That-
thank you for the sub. Now that's somebody who would see my take here, and just be baffled by how much of a lefty libtard I am right now. Critically thinking veteran. That's somebody maybe you should talk to sometime. Are you familiar with CTV?
I'm not. I'd happily discuss veganism with anyone.
Oh, that'd be an
Yeah,
interesting
it's like that's what I
conversation.
do.
100%.
Yeah, 100% do it. I mean, like, at the end of the day, I don't think that there can be a rational argument that can defend the consumption of animals,
Hmm.
and animal products. I think that we've reached a point where, like, ethical consciousness has, risen above an anthropocentric understanding of right and wrong.
Hmm. So here's two questions for you. The first one is: do you think at all it's problematic? I know CTV. This guy's not joking. Do you think there is it at all problematic with comparing disabled people to animals? I gotta say this because somebody's gonna cancel me for it. I know, so I gotta bring it up at some point.
Um, I think that the reason that we see it as problematic in the first place is because we've already differentiated humans and animals to the point in which we think that we can objectify one and it be justified, which is why we could say, like, they treated me like a piece of meat without considering the fact that, when we talk about a piece of meat, we're actually talking about the flesh of another being. I'd say that when we compare humans and animals, what we're doing is we're comparing like moral status. It's not like I'm dehumanizing that individual. I'm not saying that they are an animal. I'm saying that likewise, I'm comparable to an animal in terms of my capacity for suffering. And that's just, it's not wrong to compare humans at all to animals. I think that, if, one of the big things in more controversial takes that sometimes vegans make is comparing what happens in animal agriculture to the Holocaust. Because 70 billion land animals are killed every year. So there's like, I think it's like basically like an Auschwitz level of, like, not Auschwitz,
You
like
do see when you
Holocaust level
say
event
you do
in terms
see
of
when
like
you
every few
say
days.
you do see when you
Um,
say this though, right? Um, how that's gonna come off really bad when you compare.
oh, it
It
can.
comes off
Anyway, well, I think
terribly.
that there's two things that can be said. One, it's meant to make people feel uncomfortable, because the whole point is to question why you would differentiate one from the other.
Okay.
The next thing that they say is, like, obviously we're not saying that they're identical. Um, for example, there's actually a Holocaust survivor who comes out and makes this comparison. He was in the Warsaw Ghetto, and many of his family members were killed in the Holocaust, and he believed that the same ethical foundation led to the mistreatment of animals as it has humans, and so he makes like these points. And when we consider, animal agriculture, what we can consider in this is that it's just the blatant objectification of another sentient being to the point in which that it's not morally considerable at all. And so when we make comparisons to, like, so for example, if someone was to compare me to an animal, there's nothing wrong with that. If someone was to say I was an animal, like, like someone was to go, you're a monkey, well, then they're trying to dehumanize us and then, take
Yeah.
something from me, as in, like, accuse me of being something from which I'm not. And that's an insult. Whilst an open comparison about suffering is not insulting.
Hmm. Okay. Here's another thing. I'm not gonna agree or disagree with you on that, because
I know, spicy. I know.
that's not a hill I'm gonna get on. But I will ask you this next question. This is something that's been proposed by people like Rem the Bath Boy. You're familiar with them?
Yeah, I actually turned him vegan.
So you did
Well, I
turn him
helped
vegan.
anyway. I helped anyway.
So he said, and I see this a decent amount still. What about like indigenous communities which have used animals for generations to sustain themselves, consume all parts of the body, and this is a huge part of the culture. I would even say me growing up fishing was a part of my culture, for example. What would you say to people like that this could be considered cultural erasure of generations upon generations if we were to get rid of these practices?
Slavery was cultural.
Guys,
Sexism was
you really
cultural.
just bite the
Racism was
bullet as
cultural.
physically hard as possible. You just went straight for labor. You decided to grab the bullet and place it between both of your molars and just bite down as hard as possible.
Well, like, I think that what we do to animals is a perpetuation of a form of, enslavement and torture. And I don't think I don't feel bad in saying that. I think that obviously when we talk about what's actually going on, it's comparable in many ways, not identical though. And obviously slavery, when we talk about it, happened to humans, and that has a different moral dimension because of that. But back at the time of, let's say, the Roman Empire, people didn't give moral consideration to the Gauls that were being enslaved, because of the tribalistic morality that was perpetuated from the day. They didn't think that they were doing anything wrong. Like, why would they?
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing with animals today. The animals are placed in an environment which is unbelievably frustrating usually for them. They are usually tortured in terms of being, like, physically mutilated, normally to deal with the psychological stress of that torture, have their beaks cut off and so on, so they don't peck each other to death because they're being psychologically overwhelmed because they're placed in a room with 10,000 other chickens and can only, adapt to 100 chickens. And so have to be kept in complete darkness as well, or near complete darkness, so that they don't cannibalize each other in the deranged state. And I think understanding that, like, animals are being put into what is like a form of even psychological torture, but also obviously material torture, even not having enough space to spread their wings and stuff like that, which is basic instinctual behaviors. Understanding that these are like forms of suffering that are considerable is necessary. And I think that comparing it to something like slavery, where when the Gauls were digging those roads for the Romans, the reason it was bad is because the Gauls were placed into a scenario which caused them suffering and pain, and that we weren't considering them as free autonomous beings. We were placing ourselves as masters over them. And I think that's what we do with animals. It's the objectification of the other. We place ourselves as a master over them, use them as an object, as a means to an end, rather than an end as themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Okay, I got one more question from chat, and then if you have any more questions, you're gonna have to post them quick because we only have about 22 minutes left before I have to talk to somebody about wokeness. Okay, so
right, no problem.
Why do you care so much about the emotional state of non-human animals? Why is this a priority at all?
Okay, so I can tell you why. So like right now, there's over 70 billion land animals that are killed every year. So when we talk about in comparison of like genocides throughout human history, there hasn't been a genocide of humans that is even as comparable. And this is done for completely unnecessary means. Now, this is even considering sea life, where the way in which we actually extract sea life, like basically through giant nets, captures up like 3 times more bykill than actual processable fish, which gets sold. So you end up with like tons, like trillions of animals, which is measured in tons, that are being killed for really for food and animal byproducts, like use in like certain products. That is entirely unnecessary. We don't need these products to survive. We can live happier. We can live happy, healthier lives even when we avoid these animal products. So there's a considerable amount of suffering which is not being questioned. We are living in an era which I would say is a dark age in terms of ethics, where we have mechanized and industrialized the torture and death of other non-human creatures, and we've justified that on the back of tradition that is perpetuating the ideology of something being natural, normal, and necessary when it's neither or none of those things. There's nothing necessary about the consumption and death of animals. Something being natural wouldn't justify it either. That's the naturalistic fallacy, or the driving a north from an is. And it being normal doesn't justify it in terms of whether we can, just because something is normal, is done, is agreed upon, doesn't make it the right thing to do. And I think that when I care about non-human animals, and why we should care about these things, is because of that point primarily, that billions of animals are suffering and dying. The second point I would say would be in terms of the human cost. So most people don't realize it, but infections like zoonotic diseases, if you will, like COVID-19, are the result of having large populations of animals in close proximity to humans. And obviously these can drastically crush our economies, ravage their way through their populations, killing countless millions, and causing the collapse of our healthcare systems. The actual cause of these diseases is well known. We know about many different kinds of zoonotic diseases. Most primarily worried about things like swine flu, because every type of flu that is catchable basically by a pig can be passed on to a human because of the similarity between animals and humans. And so we're basically locking in the right mutations to cause the next Black Death or smallpox epidemic. We have been incredibly lucky with COVID-19. It had a death rate of 1 to 3%, up to 15% in like over 85.
Yep, very low, guys. So remember, eat away, eat animals all you want. That is what a perspective philosophy is telling you currently. Animals are good for consumption. Eat away. We all lived this time. Live on the edge.
Well, this is the thing. I think we've actually been incredibly lucky. Like H1N1, H5N1 had mortality rates of beyond 30% upwards, and just didn't have the virulency of COVID-19. So if we look at the likelihood, which is, I think, it's not a matter of whether it, like, not a matter of like if, it's a matter of when. We will have an epidemic eventually, if we continue down this path, that will absolutely not only crush our economies, but kill masses of our population. And for bacon, like
Bacon. The thing that gets me about bacon, though, is people who like bacon are suckers anyway. Okay, I've had a long-standing disagreement with bacon as an institution in food. Okay, it's in too many places that it doesn't need to be. Okay, the bacon is only liked because people fell for a bunch of marketing tricks by companies who wanted to sell the cheap part of a pig. That's the only reason it's popular.
well, I mean, like I think I wouldn't necessarily disagree. I just think that, and like even if it was absolutely delicious, it seems to be irrational to
I know. I'm just saying it's
oh, I
not
know,
only
I get.
bad morally, but it also sucks, and you're all suckers.
You're just baiting your chat at this point. Like the thing is that but I mean like that's like
Anyone who says
only like
bacon is good is gonna get banned in chat. I just want to make that clear. Continue.
yeah. So I mean the next point as well is like antibiotic resistance. Most people don't realize that antibiotic resistance is a massive existential threat to humans. And most antibiotics, 70% I think it is, of antibiotics are fed to non-human animals in that feed to prevent disease, so that when we consume them, like it's like profitable. Um, one second there.
Mods, can we make bacon a banned term in chat quick?
Uh, so like antibiotic resistance in like from meat, dairy, and eggs is actually really quite high, especially like milk and meat, I think. So you manage to like you end up consuming animal products, which means that when you get an infection, you die because you are no longer able to treat that infection with antibiotics because it's become antibiotic resistant. So yeah, this is another issue. And then most people don't even realize it, but meat, dairy, and eggs are actually associated with high crime rates and psychological issues. So I actually have a video on this, like Working in Hell, which talks about the lives of slaughterhouse workers. Slaughterhouse workers are usually, immigrants
Oh
or
my gosh. Yes. Okay. Sorry to interrupt you, but um, the meatpacking industry in this country is extremely disgusting. The lack of unionization, the lack of protections, the speed at which workers have been, like the amount of speed have been doubled as of recent years that people are working. The vast majority of injuries are like people getting cut by other people in the line because of how fast they're going. They're incentivized not to report medical injuries. They force people to sign. It's absolutely disgusting, the meatpacking industry in this country.
oh yeah,
Absolutely
absolutely.
disgusting.
It's in every country pretty much, but
Yeah. I
the
only know
United
this
States,
country, so I can only say for
yeah.
America.
The United States is especially bad, especially since the the hatred of unionization, but the willingness to use foreign labor to undercut American labor as well in terms of like you're replaceable and you're replaceable.
What'll
So
happen is somebody's an immigrant laborer and they'll get injured and they'll make them sign a settlement contract when they don't even know what they're signing.
yeah, that sounds about right. The ways in which there's actually interviews with there's a very famous, I have to find out, I'll send you the link of a vegan activist who was a slaughterhouse worker and basically talks about all the forms of exploitation that was done to them. But I mean, like most people don't realize that the psychological harm is, if anything, worse than the physical harm that they go through. And I mean, we're talking about a place where you could have like 2 amputations in a week because of the amount of the severity of lacerations. I mean, you're holding blades which are designed to kill animals, which with much
Kill
greater.
or butcher their body parts.
Yeah, exactly. So these are incredibly sharp. They're used to
And they're frequently sharpened as well. It's not like they're really sharp. You have to re-sharpen them throughout the day, I believe.
yeah, I mean, they have to maintain that like level of sharpness to basically perform the task
Yeah.
and to make sure that it's like efficient. So they end up they're incredibly dangerous. Like people talk about animals that have not been stunned or not been stunned correctly, or just accidents of them getting hit in the head with these knives, slitting their own throats by accident.
That doesn't sound
Awfully
fun.
yeah, exactly. Awfully stressful conditions. And then if we look at the psychological distress of killing literally thousands of animals a day. Your job is to go to work and kill all day long. Um, the likelihood of sadism is incredibly high. You get what's called, there's been numerous tests on this, what's called post-traumatic. Well, it's actually a form of PTSD, and it's called perpetration-induced traumatic stress. So this is where people become essentially they have a value contradiction within them. They don't believe that it's okay to hurt others, but they are harming others anyway. So usually this is very psychologically detrimental, especially to the average American who not only considers animals, but even when they don't consider animals, usually wouldn't do what these workers are having to do. And so the typically get psychological symptom, which is called psychological disassociation. So this happens when you have trauma. You start disassociating with the moment you're in, and disassociating from your psyche. And this normally creates another personality, another way of dealing with the moment. These personalities usually are more aggressive, more sadistic, and much lower in empathy. And even on farmers, we'll have studies that show farmers statistically have much lower empathy than the
Can you
other
give me a
population.
source on that?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah,
I just
don't want to go around saying these farmers lack empathy. I just
Oh yeah,
like a
yeah.
source
I
on
can.
that.
I'll send it over. Do you mind if I do it like
Yeah,
after this?
afterwards it's fine. But
Yeah.
I have another question. Okay, there's a lot of questions, so I want to make sure we get as many people as possible.
Yeah, I was just going to quickly say, just to quickly round that off, we can actually relate. We've actually got studies that show crime rates for violence directly correlating with the size of the slaughterhouse facility that is near the area. So arrest rates, report rates.
Do we know that's connected in any way, or is it just like
Well,
a
these are
dink?
no. Well, what we have is we've controlled for usually almost every single other other factor. So economics, race, gender, pretty much every.
Wait. Let's also remember. These slaughterhouses are usually put in some of the most disadvantaged communities in the country.
Yeah,
The idea is that they're going to put them here because then they can charge the workers extremely low rates because there's no other work in the area. So I feel like while it is true that slaughterhouses would be in areas with higher crime rates, that doesn't necessarily as a cause due to the slaughterhouse. It could be caused by the area that it's in.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, that's an argument, but then the controlled thousands of slaughterhouse facilities, the control for that thousands of slaughterhouse facilities, taking into considering the economics, like the wealth of the area, the nationality, like race, loads of other things, gender. Gender is a big one. Violent crime in men is way higher than women, for example. What else? And then also compared it against other primary industries, so other manual labor and other exploited jobs as well. And there's a definite relation. It's so strong that it's doubled for a slaughterhouse facility with 7,500 workers. The arrest and report rate for violent crime is twice an area that has not got a slaughterhouse facility.
Do you think that could be part and reason? So you're suggesting this isn't because of the nature of the work and not because of the practices of the industry? Because I think a lot of people could argue that it's due to the practices of the industry.
I think that it's the nature of the work. So I think if you listen to some of the interviews with slaughterhouse workers, they talk about having diminished forms of empathy. There's ones that have reported even being more willing to easier to flip out, like angrier and more aggressive and more willing to take violent action. Less inhibition towards violence. Others that have talked about even having sadism. There's rates of alcoholism and drug abuse are massively associated with the job. Insomnia. People talking about having nightmares in which they have cows standing over them, asking them why they've done this. Nightmares of eyes. Constantly watching them, feelings of paranoia.
That would be pretty. That would suck to have discords. That would suck to have dreams of cows over you saying "Why'd you do it? Come on, my name was Betsy."
But I mean, it's funny, but I mean, it's imagine obviously
it's just an insane visual.
Oh, that's the thing. It's the fact that the insane visual really is most people don't realize it, but if you see a slaughterhouse kill floor, it's just blood everywhere.
I would assume so.
And I mean, most people aren't built for that. Dealing with that
Yeah,
on
I
a
don't.
daily basis.
I mean, it would take a lot for me to. The thing about fishing is it's kind of very dispute. I always did catch and release. I never liked killing the fish that I caught. So the idea of just killing like something every 3 to 5 seconds in a
Exactly right.
methodical fashion, um, just feels like absolutely. That feels extremely actually like I would have to completely disconnect myself from the animals. You know.
They even talk about like how the whole way of life like kind of changes, like the humor some like becomes darker. So like even taking like putting each other at risk, and stuff like that, in these facilities because of it. Like it's a really it does change the way that you see the world. I think that it would be like kind of naive to think that it wouldn't. Um, but I have the studies for that anyway, and obviously I have the video Working in Hell, which I reference the studies in the video. It is really like you've got people like I know that there was a YouTuber that was an ex slaughterhouse worker that said that he got anorexia from the experience. Like he went in like psychological like had like a crisis and stuff. Um, there's like loads of stuff, but like yeah, like sorry, we can continue onwards anyway. But I was just the one last thing is like one of the worst parts of this was that in terms of violent crime, the highest rates of violent crime were actually domestic violence, and the thing that it's because of the author proposed that it might be because of the vulnerable nature of
But
animals.
this wasn't like a conclusion from the study. They're saying it might be, right?
It might be,
they're
yeah,
just okay. I just
yeah,
want to be clear
yeah.
because that is a big claim to make that like going working in a slaughterhouse can make it easier for you to like you could be at a higher rate to actually like beat your partner like that is a
Yeah, it's a massive claim to make, but they were saying like obviously the rates of violent crime as a whole increased, and the
yeah.
highest rate was domestic violence. And
But again, this
the-
would be in communities that would already be at a higher rate for these types of crimes due to the
oh yeah, but
nature.
the controlled
They
for
control for poverty, they control for the community, they control for all that, and just
yeah,
try to separate it from the community completely.
yeah,
Do you think the study did it effectively?
yeah, I do. I think that actually the even the one of the most criticizable things about the study was that they included small slaughterhouse facilities, like privately owned farms, like little ones, and that actually may have diluted the conclusions because small local farmers who are killing like 3 to 4 animals every few months versus a slaughterhouse facility which is processing tens of thousands of animals
Hmm.
is not even a comparison.
You would have to you think you would have to separate those two systems because it's
Oh, 100% in
the
terms of
the
psychological
rate
damage.
of what you're doing.
Yeah, psychological damage, even how you're doing it, like you're not placed under like the same like, stresses and stuff like that, and you're not surrounded by a community of individuals who are under the exact same, in the exact same way, under the exact same conditions as well. So yeah, I'll definitely separate them out.
Yeah. I have another question from chat.
Go for it.
Do you see exception with those that have food allergies who cannot obtain all required vitamins through supplements? Not everyone can process supplements easily, such as B12.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, like you don't necessarily need. I mean, you can get the B12 injection if you are incapable of absorbing B12. It's like a very, very small amount of people who can't take the supplement, but you can get the injection anyway, and that'll boost your blood levels of B12 up. But most people are absolutely fine on the supplement, so there's no real need to like take animal products. Even let's say, for example, let's say you can't convert, what is it, like ALA to DHA, like omega 3. You can't convert over to omega 3 from like ALA. You can get vegan DHA and stuff now, like like supplements and stuff. So it like really there are like from I've never seen a health condition which warranted um
Hypothetically, let's say this.
hypothetically
If
if
it
it was.
did, then we would just be back to the conclusion of you think somebody should choose themselves and their family over animals. Anyway,
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, I
we've already
mean,
been over
how, like,
this.
yeah, I mean, like, if you're a vampire, and
Yeah.
you need to, it's you or like some other person, then it's the other person, right? Like, I remember one of me, like, someone like I knew used, like, asked us, he was like, Lewis, like, how are you? You're on a desert island. It's you or the pig. I'm like, mate, if I'm on a desert island and it's me or you, it's you.
But
Like,
there are
yeah,
people who cannot take oral supplements though.
yeah, but like it depends on
And
the
what if they're and they are also allergic to the injections, right? then you're in a position where like
yet,
you don't got a lot of options.
yeah, I mean, like I'm yet to see someone like in that scenario. And I've heard like
Well,
of a
again,
lot.
I'm only bringing this up because somebody in chat saying they are in this
Oh yeah,
scenario.
yeah. I mean, in theory, if there was absolutely no alternative, and we're being honest with ourselves, and certainly not trying to use it as a justification to get out of our duty, then yeah, then that's fair enough. But like, I'm yet to see that.
Okay. Do you think you could get into the use of animals in research and whether it's ethical? And we only have about 3 minutes left, so just 3
I
minutes
don't
for
think
that
that
one.
I don't think that it's justifiable. I think that if it's not justifiable to like place humans in that scenario a lot of the time, we wouldn't justify it to animals, especially since we wouldn't even do it to criminals. We wouldn't put people who have actually killed and maimed other humans into those situations, yet we would do it to something like an innocent creature, and some of these experiments are absolutely vile and don't even produce conclusions which are like either necessary, like cosmetics. We don't even need to test a lot of the cosmetics, or even if we did, the cosmetics themselves are unnecessary, and the the methods are vile. Not only does it not consider the animals at all, but they actively try to kill the animals with the chemicals a lot of the time that they're testing in order to see how long it like how safe this chemical in theory is. It's like good practice. So there's no consideration of the animal. Then you have other forms of experimentation which are actually when we have the efficacy, like animal testing on products on animals is dubious a lot of the time anyway, because of the biological differences between animals and humans. There's it leaves a lot to essentially to like it leaves a lot up to chance. So a great example is thamilamide. Thamilamide was given to pregnant animals, lots of different kinds of pregnant animals, and came back safe. Didn't cause any birth defects, but in humans it caused severe birth defects, and this was like a morning sickness drug. Testing on animals doesn't necessarily lead to the conclusions that it's safe for humans anyway. There's a great deal of biological differences between animals and humans which warrant consideration. For example, I think rats have like 4 livers. That I mean that is that they're like detoxification machines versus like humans. And then there's even other forms of animal testing which are even, I would argue, even worse, like psychological animal testing. So you had like what's it? I can't remember. It's not Harlow's monkeys and so on. There are actually experiments where they created like what was a monster mother. So they tested to see the maternal instinct of a baby chimp, and to do so they created a cloth monkey and a metal monkey. The cloth monkey was to emulate the comfort that they would receive from being from their mother,
I think
whilst the
I'm
metal
familiar
monkey
with this. Yeah.
had the feeding mechanism. And what they found is that the monkey preferred the cloth monkey to kind of hug on to, and then would go over to feed from that monkey, and then go back to the cloth one. Then they decided they wanted to test the reactions to these scenarios. So they created monkeys that were like cloth monkeys and stuff that would actively harm the baby monkey. So they created one that would fling the monkey away and like smack it against the wall. They created one that would blow
Poor baby
air.
monkeys.
Yeah, this is the thing. They had ones that had needles coming out of the mothers in order to stab the monkeys. And what they knew as well, and they knew this before they made this scenario, which is why they did it, is that they knew that the baby monkey would actually latch on harder as they receive pain. Like the natural reaction is to cuddle their mother for protection, and so they wanted to see if the cuddling made like hurt more than the like would make them stop, if whether they'd stop cuddling if it hurt more. And so they had like spikes come out of the mother so that they would cuddle harder and it would hurt them even harder, like hurt them even more. They said that this wasn't enough. Like clearly, I don't know why. I don't know what the hell they were trying to get from this. I mean, bear in mind that the human psychology and animal psychology is invariably different. But then they decided to breed a monkey in isolation, keep it in total isolation its entire life, forcefully impregnate it, remove the baby, and then put it back in and see how it would react. Obviously, it had never seen a monkey before, and normally it would kill its child. And this was done numerous times. In terms of like dogs, they have electrocuted dogs just to see how long it would take for them to stop crying.
You trying to give me depression here?
Yeah,
because
I'm just saying, like,
I'm familiar with like Pavlov's experiments, and some stuff he did was pretty weird.
yeah, I'm
But
just saying that we should definitely be against vivisection.
yeah,
It's absolutely
here's interesting, and I'm actually 2 minutes over, and I gotta call these people quick. But 1 second, maybe we still on for 8 p.m. Actually, we have 30 minutes left. Pog, I didn't know that. But probably should wrap it up anyway. We can go for an hour and a half so far. So what about this idea that, do you see at all the strangeness, and like we needed to do we did some of these experiments to find out some of the information we have now. For example, we had to inflict pain onto fish to figure out that they actually feel pain and have statistical evidence that could then be used to then go help stop and be used to possibly stop practices that hurt fish. Do you see at all the
I don't think that's necessarily wrong. I think so long as it's done in a way that like harms the fish temporarily and then can be undone, especially like so long as we're considering the moral hazard.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So like, yeah.
So, is there anything you wanted to ask me before we wrap this up?
Yeah, would you consider moving to a plant-based diet and stop consuming animal products?
I'm definitely considering it. I'm in the middle of moving between homes, so I don't know if I can do that right now. Here's a genuine question: does it have a large increase in cost?
No, I wouldn't say so. Actually, most of the world's population, it depends on what you eat, obviously. Like if you go and eat like the fancy supplement, like the fancy replacement foods, then more so. But if you eat in a sustainable way, then not really. So if you eat
That fish
beans
is
and rice,
pogging. Sorry, continue.
no, sorry. If you eat beans and rice, like not really at all. Like the world's poorest populations consume primarily a plant-based diet because of that.
Mm.
But then if you eat like obviously the more like luxurious and fancy your food gets, the higher the cost. So you can eat a vegan diet on any budget. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely considering it more than I have before. The more I think about it, I think this is really just something where like I think it's only a matter of time. You know what I mean? I think it's because we
Yeah.
didn't even talk about the environmental impacts of factory farming, for example. We didn't even talk about that.
Huge. Huge. You talked about poor communities, especially like poor black communities. Put a slaughterhouse facility next to a poor black community,
Yep.
and then pump fecal matter into the air because it's cheaper to get rid of it that
Yes,
way.
I've seen a lot of stories about communities that have been its air just destroyed, the disgusting smells that they put because they pump the fecal, yeah, exactly, basically pig shit into the air to dispose of it because they don't want to do it properly.
Yeah, exactly.
And
And
the
then
fines
even
they're
if they
going to
don't,
get for actually doing that are less than the cost they would have incurred if they just disposed of it properly.
yeah, that's not surprising. I think that even if they do try to dispose of it anyway, you get like runoff, which pollute. I mean, like 35,000 miles of river have been polluted in the United States alone. So when you are fishing, you're actually fishing in waters that have been polluted with like animal fecal matter, and which can cause like obviously, as I say, zoonotic diseases, but also um, can just genuinely kill everything in the river, and go on to kill everything in that area of the ocean, which is why you have like downstream from a lot of American rivers and rivers in general, you have just dead zones that have been polluted with high levels of nitrogen, and everything in that area is dead. In terms of commercial fishing, it's responsible for 46% of ocean plastics as detached fishing nets. So, people are, like one of the running vegan jokes is that people stop using plastic straws to help fish, but won't stop eating fish to help fish.
That is actually funny, yeah.
And there's other things. I mean, there's like climate change. 28% of greenhouse gas emissions are attributable to animal agriculture. And it's
28%.
28%.
Wow, that's a lot more than
And
I
that
thought.
Yeah, I mean, the UN says 16%, but they don't consider the destruction of carbon sinks like the Amazon rainforest, which is why Oxford researchers bumped the number up to 28%. I think that was like in 2019.
Hmm.
And like, I mean, we're talking about, and then obviously there's things like soil erosion. Animal agriculture is actually really bad for pretty much everything, and almost all of our crops are grown to feed animals. So
Do you, here's a
yeah,
question before we have to wrap this up because we're going about for an hour and 37 minutes now, so we do need to kind of wrap it up. I'm sorry
yeah,
because
that's
I have
not
been
a
enjoying
problem.
this conversation. We can have a wider conversation about veganism at another date. Possibly I could of course set you up with people to have debates about veganism. if you ever wanted to do
100%.
that.
Love that. Love
Because I
that.
know a
Oh,
million conservatives who would love to debate you on that.
I love debating veganism, man. It's like my favorite thing.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I was easy because I've already kind of went down this road myself personally. I'm just waiting to kind of make that jump. So
Yeah, I appreciate that.
here's the I gotta I forgot it. I forgot what I was gonna ask. So do you have any more questions for me before we wrap this up?
No, but I'm just gonna say, like, if you ever do need like any help in the transition, I know that some people can find it difficult. If you're looking for
Okay,
like
for anybody
community,
jumping in here, when he says transition, he means transition to veganism. Okay, chat.
is that what I meant?
Yes, yes.
No, yeah, the transition to veganism, then just let us know. And obviously I'll do my best to help. And if not, like obviously find someone who's like capable of aiding you on that. Also, I think I think you brought up indigenous populations. And I forgot to answer, like, because like a lot of people try to justify, for example, the Native American kind of, they used to use all the animal and so on, and we're the wrong people for being such a consumerist, discarding society which doesn't approach animals like that. I'd say that, like, if they're still objectifying the animal and still using it, it's still wrong. And if they can't do otherwise, then they should do otherwise. And if we can help them do otherwise, then we should help them do otherwise. Like, I don't think we should be putting people into scenarios where they're having to.
So you don't think somebody's culture is a justification
No,
for doing something that you find morally wrong under your framework? Then that would be your
no,
basically answer.
no.
It'd
I
be
would
like if somebody's culture was like, say, to do, for example, I don't think genital mutilation
yeah,
is
female
justifiable.
FGM.
Or
Yeah,
yeah, I don't think that's justifiable under saying, well, that's part of my culture, or anybody's using anything that I would find immoral under my framework, saying whether it be standards of morality when it comes to sex and gender, sexuality, for example, stuff like that. I don't think that it could be justifiable through just the veil of culture.
yeah. It's like, I wouldn't care if bombing, like, was it like Yemen, was in the Saudi culture. It doesn't make it okay, you know. um,
That
and
thing,
it's yeah, and I think that's the point. Like, I think that I'm a moral objectivist, so I'm going to say that, like, there is a right and wrong, independent from what people like perceive. But then I'm very well aware that people's understanding of right and wrong is culturally embedded. It's embedded in our language games, in our ethical discourse, in our understanding of reality. Just as, like, our understanding of physics is socio-historical. Like, Newtonian physics
Okay,
was the
one second.
dominant.
Okay,
Uh,
chat. Fine. You don't like watching people fish? Fine. We're just gonna look up image of fish, and we're gonna look at that. Okay? You happy? You like this instead of the actual footage? I'm gonna choose the. There you go. There is an image of a fish. You happy now? Congratulations. This is stream now. Congrats. Am I woke enough for you now? Okay. Better. Continue. Sorry. We gotta wrap it
yeah,
up.
no problem. Like, obviously, ethical right is relative to population in terms of, like, knowledge of what is right, and I'm aware of that. And I don't believe you can force moral progress. I think we should just have conversations and make arguments about this sort of stuff. So yeah, it's like trying to convince someone in another culture that oppresses women, that it's wrong. We can't force them to think that it's wrong definitionally, but we can educate and we can converse with them and try and convince them of what it overall the rational position on that, which is don't oppress women, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's the same thing with veganism. I think that we can't force anyone to be vegan, but we can try and argue for them to be vegan in the end from rational, ethical basis.
Got you. Okay. Sounds wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on. Well, I'll see if I can set you up a debate about veganism. I think that there's a lot of options for you if you really want to do that. So just
Oh
follow up
God,
with me, and
please, all the merrier.
I can set that up easy. Okay. I'll
Oh,
even host the
absolutely.
whole thing.
That'd be great, man. I would love that. Thank you very much.
No problem. You have a nice day. Okay.
You have a nice day too, mate. Thanks
Yep.
for the conversation.
See you later.